4 years ago today, Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, which has become Europe's biggest conflict since the Second World War. Before the break, you heard from Ukraine's ambassador to Canada. Now for some perspective from Ukraine's European allies. Witold Dzielski is Poland's ambassador to Canada, and Tjorven Bellmann is Germany's ambassador to Canada. Hello to both of you. Thank you very much for making the time for the conversation today. I really appreciate it. Ambassador Bellmann, I'll start with you. You know, 4 years is a hard amount of time to picture. It certainly feels very weighted today. What does it signify? What does that period of time signify to you?
I think it's a very grim anniversary, obviously. All the loss of life, the pain, it makes me angry, and it makes me incredibly, my heart is broken over the fact that we are entering a 5th year of war. I will never forget the early days of the war and how we had, at the time I was the ADM in charge of coordinating G7 and also in charge of Ukraine in the German Foreign Office, and how we had to organize the whole G7 support for Ukraine and learn from scratch and you know, learn how to organize different weapon systems and then how to organize energy and all these different phases the war went through. I think we made many mistakes over these years. We learned a lot over these years. Today, Germany is Ukraine's biggest supporter in terms of civilian and military aid, and you know, our support will remain steadfast, and we will not waver.
I remember actually in the weeks that followed the beginning of this war, I was in Poland, where many of the refugees at the time, Ambassador, were being welcomed. There was a huge amount of support for those refugees at the time and for Ukrainians' cause. How would you assess the level of support in Poland and more largely among Ukraine's allies right now?
Well, that time was the beginning of the full-scale aggression was a quite spectacular time in terms of humanitarian support. We had in 2000, there was, you know, more or less 10 million people going back and forth through the border. About 2 million refugees that were welcomed to the Polish families, mostly women and children at that time. It's a different it's a different situation today. There are still many Ukrainians in Poland, about 2 million, but they work. They add to building the resilience of the eastern flank, and in that regard, they also continue supporting Ukraine. Yeah, the support is still there, but it's of a different quality.
When you think about the significance, Ambassador, of support from Ukraine's allies at this moment in time, when you reflect, for example, on the anger you feel entering the 5th year of this war, how would you assess that level of support relative to where it was, let's say, at the outset?
I think it's much more substantial today, and especially in this phase where some of the US support we've seen in the past, and which was so hugely important, is not there anymore. So I think we Europeans really realized that we have to step up. I think we've largely managed to do that. Of course, you know, there's a big gap, but I would say if you look at all the initiatives we've taken, how inside NATO now Europeans buy urgently needed weapons, US weapons that Ukraine needs from the US in order to allow for these weapons still to continue to flow to Ukraine. When you see the amount of funding we have mobilized over the years, it's unprecedented. I've never seen that amount of support for any conflict in the world. So I think we very much realize that this is not just Ukrainians fighting for their freedom. This is the future of the security in Europe that this war is all about.
Ambassador, what do you think people outside of Europe may not understand about the stakes of this war?
Well, for Ukrainians, the stakes are quite obvious. It's independence, it's their freedom, it's the ability of the future generations to decide for themselves. For our region, for Europe, we understand the reasons as well. But in broader sense, in our transatlantic sphere, it's really about future. We are NATO, and we like to see NATO as the dominant power globally, because it has positive influence on our life, but we believe also on the entire globe. And the significance of that conflict is that if we show weakness and we lack in providing support to Ukraine, we will show the weakness of NATO. And this will be a very different future than we would like to have.
If the leadership of the United States right now is unconvinced of what your colleague just laid out, how much harder does it make accomplishing that?
I think we are in a constant dialogue with the US on Ukraine. The negotiations are going on between Ukrainians and Americans and Russians. We have made sure that we bring the European voice to bear in this process. It's especially the E3 that are very active in this regard, but also the broader coalition of the willing, including Canada. It is constant work. And the Chancellor has made clear time and again that Europe will only support a deal that reflects Ukrainian interests and our interests. But it's a necessity to have this conversation, and we will continue to do so.
It brings me, Ambassador, to the prospect of a negotiated settlement, right? There are today words coming from the United States about the possibility of discussions even this week and another round of so-called negotiations. Based on what you know about how those have unfolded so far and what you know about Putin, what do you think the prospect of such a settlement is?
Well, I mean, we support the peace negotiations and finding a permanent solution according to Ukrainian needs. This is a process that we obviously support. At the same time, we observe and we know the tactics applied by Russia, applied by Putin, which aim at prolonging the process. We've seen those negotiations continuing, and there are suggestions on the American side, there are proposals, and there's just prolonging tactics on the side of Russia, which means that either Russia is not ready to have a serious conversation, or they don't want to have it.
What are the implications of that, do you think, for Ukraine?
Well, at the moment it's very clear the war's going on. Putin could end this war any day if he seriously wanted to. I agree with Witold that, and the Chancellor has said so publicly, that Russia will only be ready to seriously engage for peace if either economically or militarily they understand that it is in their interest to do so, and I don't think this is where we are at the moment. So we do see these tactics of prolonging the process, and which is why we have to do everything to make sure that the Ukrainians receive the support they deserve and that they need in order to be able to continue to negotiate from a position of strength.
A final word to you on that, Ambassador.
Well, look, it's a grim anniversary, but at the same time we have to stay positive and believe in Ukraine being victorious in the end, and we need to provide support in that regard. We know history, and Russia is a power, but this is a power which lost a number of wars against smaller actors. They lost against Finland in 1939, but I mean, de facto they lost. They lost the war with Japan with the beginning of the 18th century. They lost against Poland in 1920. They lost in Afghanistan. They lost, and they are right now fighting a 4-year war against Ukraine, which is a smaller power as well. And Russians don't have much to show off in this regard. So we have to stay positive, we have to stay united, and we have to continue providing support to Ukrainians, because it's really about the future.
I'll leave it on that note. Thank you very much, both of you, for making time for us. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.